Hi, everyone. My name is Cindy McDonald, and I'm so pleased to be offering another conversation with an expert in topics that are really important to us as counselors, as advisors, as parents, and just as individuals in this world working and serving our youth and serving other professionals. So today I'm so pleased to invite and have a conversation with Robert Powers. Robert, glad to have you here.
Hi, really happy to be here. I was in your class once upon a time, and so it's a really, it's a really cool experience to be back and in this position.
Well, we're glad to have you kind of on the other side of the desk and being the one delivering information instead of having to take it all in, right?
Does this happen often?
Sometimes I like having my students. So any students that take my courses or go through the UCLA program, I like having them, bring that back and share that experience. And you've been the founder. You're the founder of your own business, College Torch. As you said, you've taken some UCLA coursework. You have experience as an application reader for the Coca-Cola Foundation. And you're an alumni from Johns Hopkins University. So you've had quite a varied background, Robert. Tell us more about your background and how you became a college counselor.
Absolutely. So the professional side of it was that I sort of fell into teaching after college, and I really wanted to fall into something where I could help students one-on-one. So I think that teachers are under a lot of pressure to stay where they're at and stay in the trenches. And then for me, I really, I needed to actually for my, I think for my happiness, I needed to find something that worked for me in my own way. Working with students as a college consultant one-on-one was just all of the good parts that made me happy and energetic from teaching, but then without the classroom environment that wasn't working for me, works for lots of people, doesn't work for me. So I knew that I didn't want to do that halfway, that if I was going to do that, I had to become a real expert. And so I do all of the things that we know to do from our organizations, like fly around the country, visiting college campuses. This is so fun because as a teacher, I never got to travel. I get to travel now. And I won't stop traveling until I stop being a consultant, because we need to be experts. I think all of that's pretty standard for the journey to become a college consultant. We have a responsibility to be experts. And then maybe the interesting and relevant part of my story is how I became a specialist in LGBTQ plus students and their individual journeys. In order to know that, I mean, it's a bit more of my personal background. Is it all right if I share some of the personal background with the group?
Yeah, please do.
So some things to know about me is that I live in California. I live in Los Angeles, but I grew up in the South. I grew up in Georgia, and I went to college in Baltimore, and I've seen some different environments. And my first year teaching was in rural Pennsylvania. This was a small town, and I thought growing up in Georgia, I thought I knew, small towns and country music, and I didn't actually. That experience, I almost leave it off of my life story sometimes. That 1 year in Pennsylvania, but I learned what it was like to be in a small town, and I learned what it was like to be. To be new in a small town too, which was something like being a celebrity, and it was a culture I just was not prepared for that culture shock, but it was one of the most educational experiences of my life, actually. So I am definitely a California person, California progressive, California relaxed. I have all of the things about California that make me a good fit to live here. Probably won't go back to live in Georgia, but those are both my roots, and also I get them, and I feel like that connects me with the different viewpoints that are going to come up in the topic of LGBTQ students. So that is something to know about me, and maybe not make an assumption when we hear California and Los Angeles. I When I was growing up as a as a gay teen, I didn't identify as a gay teen in the way that I identify as a gay man now. So my story as a teenager was that there wasn't a community for me. So I was a rogue warrior. I was a lone wolf, and I didn't really know that I was alone. That's sort of the Plato's cave thing. You can't really be alone. How can you be alone if you don't know that you're alone? And I didn't know what I needed, because I certainly needed things, but I was also doing really well. I was a high achieving student in school. You know, voted into the yearbook for something and stuff like that. So I was a happy teenager. I had a girlfriend in high school, but I had crushes on boys, and all of this was just fine and happy and part of my life. It was something about me at the time valued fluidity, which is not a very mainstream narrative, especially at the time, just that I would be happy to be around people that made me excited and light up and want to relax and be myself. And that was kind of who I was, and I didn't really have the language for it. I mean, I wonder, I'd thought about it sometimes, but who am I with the words and the labels? But I was sort of doing the no labels thing. At the time, it was fine. The no labels were my way of being fluid. So the way it felt was that sometimes I liked one thing, sometimes I liked another thing, sometimes it would change or it would depend on who I was around. And sometimes I was many things at once. And if I didn't understand it, it was okay. It was kind of like a moving thing, or fluid. So that probably would have made it confusing to be part of a community of gay teens at the time, if I had one, but I didn't have one. So really, I just was, I had a girlfriend, and then people were kind of confused because I was a confusing person to them. I wasn't confusing to myself though, so I was happy and fine. Where I think that, and I guess I should say, as a small detour, the kids these days, when I sound like the kids these days, the teens, their generation is so different than mine. It is. So now the teens are really, really, really open-minded when it comes to gender and sexuality, to the point where they're non-topics for many of them, in the way that is more like the way I was thinking as a teenager, and nobody understood me and I sounded confused or in denial. But it's kind of like, for a lot of teens, when you talk to them about sexuality, they're kind of like, why are we talking about this? Is this relevant? Or do we need this? Do we need this conversation? Because I think that we were doing just fine when we didn't have the labels. They know that two of their friends are now dating. Okay. And they don't need to then have that follow-up conversation about, so does this make Sam a lesbian if she's dating a girl? What does this make her? Because I need to know what her identity is in order for me to feel like I'm grounded in the world. They're kind of cool with just existing and having feelings and kind of living it out and skipping the conversation. Of course, there are still some that would like the conversation. And I think this is where we get into the difference between sexuality, the way we feel, and identity, the words we use to describe ourselves that make us feel part of a community. So that's where I came to discover my identity one day as a gay man. I got to choose that. So I didn't choose my sexuality. I chose the label of gay man because it put me in a community of other gay men who had shared experiences. That's the thing I didn't know that I needed, because I was doing just fine with my feelings, but I could have used a community, and I had no idea what I was missing. So I think that it's important to track our students and how they view their own lives, their perspectives, because if we try to apply our own perspectives of how we view sexuality and gender on them, we can be having the same conversation with them in totally different rooms. For me, I was another part of my story. I was a very high achieving teen with a very closed-minded attitude towards college, the stuff that now, makes me so sad for families and students when I see them. They will only consider 12 very, very famous schools, and otherwise they can just, live that nightmare scenario if it happens. These kinds of, we see our families setting themselves up for sadness. I was that person, and so I was very lucky because I got into Hopkins, but it was the only school I got into. And I was lucky that I was a somewhat good fit for Hopkins, but I was not at all set up for having an LGBTQ community. Not only did I not conduct a college search in a way where I would find a good fit school for an LGBTQ student, specifically me as an LGBTQ student, I also didn't, I didn't do the personal work in order to figure out what exactly I needed. So even if I had read a book about LGBTQ students and what it is that they need in order to be happy, I wouldn't have known which of those things applied to me at that time in my personal journey. And so there's a lot of work that goes into the college search for LGBTQ students that if you skip, you can just end up somewhere random, which can be fine. Or it can look like, the sad story for a lot of LGBTQ people is that they do their personal work, self-discovery and community building when they're adults, like, in their 20s or later, in their 30s or later. So for me, when I got to Hopkins, I found that there was a scattered and quiet group of LGBTQ students. And I should say that this was Hopkins many years ago and that they were totally different now. So don't just, plug in a different name for the college and go discover that one on your own, because it has nothing to do with today. But I didn't have a community, and I kind of just got to live in hiding, which at this point in my life was not healthy for me. When someone would express romantic interest in me, they would do things from years ago, they would pick on me, tease me, call me terrible names, or laugh at me in a group. And then I knew later that they were trying to engage me in some sort of, it didn't need to be happening in that way at that time anymore. And at the time, there was an LGBTQ students group. It's called the Saga at the school. And they were a very small group of, a couple students who were really trying to build the thing that I was blowing off. One of my biggest regrets is that I didn't join them in that. They reached out to me a couple times, and I think that it was my job at that time to join the group, and I did not join the group. And one of the things that drives me to work with LGBTQ students now is that they should have that experience. For most of the students on their journeys, if they end up at a college where they wouldn't join a club of people who are like them, that I think that there could be something wrong there. That could be a red flag. I think that having a community as opposed to having no community is something we can mostly all agree on. Mm-hmm. So recently I even got to sit down for lunch in Los Angeles with the leader of that club from when I was just a freshman in college. And she apologized to me that they were so aggressive. She says, I know we were a lot of energy. We kept, we know that we were a lot and we just kept showing up, and I'm really sorry about that. And I said, no, you did everything you could. And it's the landscape. We're all just trying to do our best in a landscape that's confusing. And to be honest, one of the cool things is that the landscape has changed for the better for our students. And that now we can talk about things openly, not all the time, but right. A lot of the time. And if we find the safe space, the right place, and it's cool that we can do the work that before had to be silent, and then ask questions and think, and we could take time on it, and we can create good situations for ourselves. After college mostly is when I decided I really wanted to be part of a gay community, to kind of live my life really loudly and proudly, and that's what drove me to really want to say out loud, I want to help LGBTQ students. And it kind of was a self-fulfilling thing. When I started saying that out loud, people started finding me for that, because they knew that I was a good fit for them. And those are my best clients. They're the ones that make me feel happy to be in the Zoom room with them. They make me feel lucky. Like when I show up to work, it shouldn't be this feel good. It shouldn't be this easy. We should have more struggles. And that's how I knew I found a good group. Sometimes I find out in the world that I pass, that I can just walk around and people won't know that I'm a part of the LGBTQ community. And so I have a little pin that I try to wear when I can.
Your rainbow pin.
And it's one of those things where I don't always wear it. I don't have to wear it, but it's the right thing to do if I pass, because when I'm in a room full of people just not being part of my community, people might think that the community is not there. And so this is good, important work to represent, even if it's sometimes just seems a little tangential. This is something important that I've started doing. So that's my full story to how I ended up as an LGBTQ specialist and feeling very happy and lucky about it. Of course, within a specialty, we have to do the work of becoming experts. And so I have different work to do when I show up to colleges to visit than other people do.
So tell us a little bit more about that, Robert. When you go to a college, I know for people who work with neurodivergent students, they go to the Student Access Center or the student, and even those names, like some colleges still call it student disability. Who wants to go to a disability center? So where do you go and who do you talk to, and what would you like that place to be called to be more inclusive for students?
I think that in the place that we're at, that there should be an LGBTQ center at these colleges, that I would really need a good excuse. And what is the good excuse? They didn't have the money or something? What that's saying is that it's not a priority. The number of students who are on the LGBTQ spectrum is enormous. Actually, people don't announce themselves as part of this group all the time, but they're all around us. I remember when I was, one of my years, I worked at a very progressive schools in Los Angeles, and there was a session where somebody asked everybody who identified in some way as LGBTQ in a room full of teachers to raise their hands. And I didn't know that there would be one hand raised, much less than, much less like 30 or 40%. And an enormous amount of our students, they are somewhere on the spectrum where they may not want to say I'm a gay teen or I'm a lesbian teen or I'm gender non-binary, but they would still get some use out of that space. And if they had a safe space, they might be able to figure some of that out. I really don't think that the college has a good excuse to not have this space. Now, in terms of the name, I would prefer LGBTQ Center. It's inclusive of everybody, and it doesn't lump it into a women's group, like a women's center. And then I think that that's something that some of the colleges do if they're a little strapped, is that they'll put the women's stuff with the LGBTQ stuff. I think that's out, and I don't think that's the best anymore. But in some ways, we take what we can get. So if the school does that, is that such a red flag that we dump them and don't consider them? I don't know. I don't know if that's true, but it's definitely probably the first red flag, and you'll find more. When I'm visiting the schools, I want to go to that center and I want to meet the center director. Meeting this person is really huge. If they're not available to meet me, I sort of want to know why. I want to know if they're unavailable people. Sometimes they're doing something important, and that's great to know. And maybe I could set an appointment with them later. If they're unavailable, what's that about? What are they doing? Are they traveling for a conference, or are they just gone? Ultimately, this person is a huge person in the lives of our students on campus, that this person is going to be the source of energy, the source of support. And the personality power of this person, much more than their credentials, is game-changing. So I know that I want my students to be able to meet this person and know that this person is a mentor, period, that they're going to advocate for the student, go fight for resources, or talk to their professors if they need to. I mean, I want to know that this person is an unequivocal mentor for the students. And the students may feel different personality fits with these center directors. I would say if they don't like this person, then the college is out. I mean that. And I can't tell that when I meet the center director, but I can learn a lot by asking them questions. And I'm also hoping that the center director can give me some insight into LGBTQ life at the school in an honest way. I think they have a responsibility to do that. They're not admissions representatives where they're going to say only good things. They need to be honest. And I think we all know when someone's not being honest with us. Just like the admissions office can set us up with a student to chat with if we give them some time and space about it, the LGBTQ center director can set us up with an LGBTQ student who can give us the honest skinny on the school, even though they may still say mostly nice things. You after a while, you get used to the way students describe things when they're trying to be critical. They don't usually come out and say, this is awful. They'll say something like, the school's working on this thing. I'm tracking it. And so I know to go follow up on that in my research and ask the hard-hitting questions of someone else. And then always, I want to remember that the students have different preferences. So as I'm out getting opinions and trying to learn things, I need to remember, just as I do with all the parts of the college search, that there's some things that will delight some students that make other students sad, and some things that make some students sad that will delight other students. For example, when it comes to LGBTQ plus student peers, some students will be happy in a small community with just a few very supportive LGBTQ peers that like, this is their group, these are their people, and that's everything. And that's kind of a small school thing in general, right? And then other students would say that was a huge disservice to them. They were duped. They thought they were getting a gay community, but really they've got just 5 people. And I have heard some families kind of talk bad about some small schools that didn't give them the community they wanted. They said, and we transferred to NYU like we knew we needed to. Well, there was a more searching investigation that family could have done into what exactly a good community was, rather than just looking for a best list of LGBTQ fit schools. But of course, NYU offers that sprawling community of people that go everywhere, and you just kind of follow them in any direction, you're going to find somebody. Some people are going to be in that environment, they're going to get lost. They'll end up in the wrong rooms that are fine, but they're not perfect, or they'll get overwhelmed and they'll just go home and play video games. So I think that we're navigating an LGBTQ plus specific search within the college search that we all know we need to do anyways. So it's just, a little different flavor, a specific flavor of something that's very particular and individual for all the students. When I'm looking around, I do the work to try to figure out about the policies. So I want to know that the school puts things in writing. So, looking at mission statements, a lot of times, mission statement is just words, right? But there are words that a committee of people sat down and argued about. Like, they actually did figure out these words. And when policies are written, do they avoid mentioning LGBTQ students, or do they mention them by name? Do we have policies just for them? Do we have spaces for them? Has someone put thought into figuring out LGBTQ plus housing? Like, we really want the housing to be right. And ultimately, students need to navigate the college, and not everything's going to be in writing, but you can tell what college cares about based on what they spend money on. So not all students are going to want an LGBTQ studies major, but it's a really good sign that it exists, because it means the college spent money on that and hired faculty for that. Also, those faculty will do cross-disciplinary work where they'll show up in other departments with their LGBTQ plus interests, and suddenly it starts building and diversifying the curricula in the other programs. And so I look for stuff like this. Where am I seeing LGBTQ plus things? Where was the money spent? Are my students being included? Let's see. I know I know that I check in about the clubs. These schools have to have a club, and then will the students fit into that club is the students' job to figure out. But then beyond that, even at the small schools, I think we should have more than one option for the club, because our students have many identities. So I want to see if there are intersectional organizations where students can not just celebrate their LGBTQ identity, but another identity at the same time. Because it's one thing to be a gay teen, but it's actually a very specific thing to be a Black gay teen. And maybe there, is it too much for there to be an organization for the different identities within LGBTQ? Of course not. So a gender non-binary student has a totally different experience than a gay student. They have a lot in common, but also they have different experiences. So where the groups get more specific is usually a good sign. The larger the college is, of course, the easier this is. But
Right.
our students should be able to find these spaces. I want to know what spaces the students will be in to feel safe and get support, and also just have fun.
Yeah, that's key, right? Is to have that, to balance all those different, you have all these balls that you're balancing and the students, but they've added additional balls too, or they're different balls than, some other students. So, well, what are some of you've talked a little bit about the different challenges. What do you see as you work with students, whether they're high school students, transfer students, or even adults going, back to college? So often we even classify students all in one little category. And it's like, oh, they're all high school students going on to college. Well, actually, that's going to become a minority rather than majority before long. But as you're working with those high school students, what are some of the greatest challenges that you see LGBTQ plus students dealing with, Robert?
That's such a great question. And I love that you mentioned the adult students, because when I got into rooms and started speaking, for example, at PFLAG meetings, where I would share about the very unique search that LGBTQ plus students need to do that they don't always know that they need to do. The parents themselves, or the LGBTQ mentor figures in the room, they actually would kind of get really excited, and they were excited to learn about college life as it is now, because when they were considering college, it was a dangerous place full of landmines. They didn't know if it would be a safe experience, and some of them, if they're transgender, then their college experience was somewhat of a medical experience, and they were not going to be able to balance college plus that, at the time that wasn't, a supported experience for them. So they focused on themselves first, and then they skipped college. So it is pretty common that adult students in the LGBTQ community are going to say, hey, college seems like a really cool place now. It didn't always, but it seems like it's different now, and I would like to go. And then that's a crossover. So when I got into learning about the application, more like the college search process for the adult students, that is a very, very specific niche that I don't see almost anyone in. And it's not easy to find those schools that are good fits for adult learners. I mean, you'd think it would be hard to find the good fits for LGBTQ students, but the adult learners, that one was really hard. And a lot of it is like, go to the place that's close to you because you've got a life to live. So, we do our best, as experts in one thing, when we can help families by crossing over into another specialty, we have to decide whether we can do that and do service to the family. But that was an experience where I found that I was best to help families the best I could, because there isn't this person out there, the expert in LGBTQ plus students and the expert in adult students going back to college. I don't know this person. And so it's a great example of pushing ourselves in that way, that we can't always feel totally competent and in charge all the time. Like sometimes we need to just step out of our comfort zone to do things to help the families. anyways, that's absolutely right. And just like there are LGBTQ students going as adults, or maybe they just even took some time off to do personal things, or sometimes LGBTQ students are just having like a lot going on, and they've had a rough time in school, or a disciplinary problem, right? Or, whatever it is, they're going back to school. Just like we have those students, we've also got our transfer students, and these are students who they just had a lot going on. They could have done the 4-year, and they decided to do the 2-year, and then now it seems like they can go to the. And so, being fluent with transfer process can help us to help our students with the many things that they need help with. That said, I would say that in terms of our challenges for our students, a lot of them don't know that they have this unique college search in front of them, and they're doing what we know is the modus operandi for teens, which is to go where their friends are going. And for them, that can be precarious, that their friends could be going somewhere that's not safe for them. They don't realize, or usually it's not unsafe. Usually instead it's that opportunity cost of not going to the place that would really have supported them. So this is where we can help with just educating the students with what's out there. To be honest, if students know that the Campus Pride website exists, you can change their lives. We can't always just, mentor or guide every student ourselves, and just letting them know about the Campus Pride Index and the Campus Pride website can change their entire trajectory, because that website is just a trove of resources. Kind of going along with this, there are misconceptions out there that affect all families. But I think that these misconceptions are powerful for LGBTQ students and their consultants, because of kind of the political and cultural noisiness that comes with this conversation. People have strong opinions about things, and they tend to leak into the college search. And as experts and professionals, we have an ethical responsibility to help our students to get through the noise, and we can't be part of the noise. We need to share colleges with them in parts of the country that we don't agree with the politics, and let the students figure out what they think about that. That can be so hard, especially if we have, and these days, well, most of us have some political opinion. But it's important to know that this is a specialty, and to kind of clear out the misconceptions. In one of the groups recently, I saw quite a few posts that looked like that they didn't say it's not a specialty. What they said was every LGBTQ student wants to be treated like every other student, period. And I think you can get into trouble that way. I think that treating students, I think if you ask the students, they'll say, yes, please treat me equally, please treat me the same. In reality, what if that were an LD student who says, I would like to be treated just the same as students who aren't dyslexic. If you could do that, please, that would be great. We have to say, well, hold on. You actually have to think about some of this stuff for a good reason. So being experts, showing up and being able to navigate the specialty is a great way to carve through the misconceptions. The big misconceptions I see are about the region, that people make assumptions that there are good and bad places to be LGBTQ. And I know consultants who feel confident to just say, California, New York City, let's figure it out. Do you want to go to California? Do you want to the big city? Because California is more laid back, and New York City has everything. And then between the two of those, you should be just fine. Of course, there's enormous problems with that. New York City is quintessentially unaffordable. It's not a happy place for everybody, just as a personality thing. I mean, there are some people who are really happy in New York City, and other people, that's just the worst place they can think about it. They just haven't been there, and they don't know that yet. So I think that some students are right for New York City, but we can't just chip off the LGBTQ students to New York City and assume that that's a good fit. Same thing with California. California is an incredibly diverse place. People in Central Valley have different worldviews than people in Los Angeles, than they do in San Diego, than they do in Bay Area, than they do in Arcata, right? Like in different places, we've got different experiences. And especially in California, We have misconceptions about the UCs, that the UCs are utopian places where everybody gets everything that they need. We have to fight that.
Uh-huh.
And we have misconceptions that California has something for everybody, when in reality, outside of the public schools, most of those schools are religious places. They're religious schools with some either religious affiliation or religious environment. And if students are good with that, if one of those works for them, and not many of them are affordable, but if they like that, then we have something. But what about all of the students who need something different than the things I just said? That's
Right.
where we need to push them to check out all of the colleges that would be a good fit for them. And just like our other students, we want to have them to be open-minded about the region. And I know you're probably going to ask me at some point a question about state politics. It's just part of the question. But Oberlin is just a beautiful, amazing place to be an LGBTQ plus student in a community of peers like you. And it's a real big shame to just remove that college from the list because you see Ohio and you say, oh, that's a 4-letter word, and then you move on.
Right.
So this is the work we can do for our students. Other misconceptions are about religion. LGBTQ plus students are, wherever they are on that spectrum, they're also going to be somewhere on the spectrum of faith. It is absolutely possible to be devoutly religious or just somewhat religious, and also to be loud and proud about an LGBTQ identity. Those students need to find schools with faith-based communities inside of them that will support them with everything they need. And some of them will even be interested in a faith-based school that can also provide them with a happy place for their LGBTQ community. That's something that it's our response. It's difficult, but we have to help them navigate that. Mm-hmm. And especially with that, we have to make sure that they do not end up at any of the religious schools that have claimed Title IX exemptions, because those are dangerous situations. So there's a big risk there. Yeah, I would say that those are the big ones. We're just trying to help our students find their best fits. Other challenges for the students are the shifting landscapes. So there are multiple shifting landscapes that our students are dealing with and that we're dealing with as consultants. So the schools are changing. So I said it about Hopkins before, is that they're not the same place that they were. And this is true with every school. And it's happening really, really fast. I went to one faith-based school on a tour and I asked about LGBTQ student experience, and they said, oh, it's changed so much. It's totally turned around. And I needed to get really specific with her, with that student, about what the timeline was on that and exactly what change had happened, because I couldn't make assumptions about that. Things are changing really fast, but it's also relative, changing in what way to get to what place. Right. Also, the students are changing. And so that thing I said is real, that you'll talk to the students about sexuality and gender, and you'll find that the basic assumptions or the definitions that you thought you shared, you might not, that they have totally different worldviews about what it means to be diverse, or what it means to be a certain identity, or maybe just to not think about it. And maybe that's okay. Also, society is changing in multiple different directions, like stretching taffy. So while society as a whole is becoming more progressive about LGBTQ issues, certain places and certain people are bearing, they're pressing in on the culture wars. And so at the same time as things are getting better, they're also getting louder in the wrong direction as well. And so we have to navigate that. Besides that, sometimes there's other challenges for the LGBTQ students, not to pile on the challenges, but they can have all sorts of family situations. We just need to be prepared to navigate that. Sometimes it's awkward for us to help students in ways that the parents don't know about. That can look like small help or medium help or big help, but it's our responsibility as advocates for teens to navigate that the best we can, given that it's challenging. If you're an independent educational consultant, you may take money from the parents, and then you may feel like it's it's difficult to do something that they don't, or have a conversation they don't know about. Ultimately, our responsibility is towards the teenagers. Similarly, the LGBTQ students could face medical challenge related to gender, or just related to mental health, and we need to be ready for some, for some curveballs, just things we're not expecting, and to be able to help them navigate that. With LGBTQ community comes mental health challenges and mental health topics, and we need to be ready for that, even when we thought it wasn't part of the story. And that could include gap years. Lastly, I think all of the students are in different places or in their journey. And so some of them, it may not have anything to do with the parents. They may not want to discuss this. This is the only specialty where we might help students and also never talk to them about the thing we're helping with. We're just thinking about it, trying to advocate for them silently in our college recommendations, or in a mysterious conversation where we're not saying what it's actually about, but maybe we know. So everybody's in a different place in their journey. Some students are, they know exactly who they are, and they just are dying for, a big community of people just like them. Other students don't know everything about this. They're trying to figure it out, and they need help from other people to have an education and in being who they are. And a certain college would help one of those students differently than the other one. And so we just want to pay attention to who these students are as individuals. There actually are going to be some students who will want the exact same college search as a student that's not LGBTQ. I'm open-minded about that, but we have to arrive at that place and not start at that place, of course.
Right. It needs to be a conscientious decision rather than a default decision. And so many students, especially, adolescents, I love the term you're using, is spectrum, because they may be totally different places on their journey at the beginning. They may not even know what their journey is yet. And yet they may be, loud and proud and know exactly where they're going and what they want to do. And so many students are so many different places in between.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
So Robert, what are questions? You've mentioned a couple of things that I've taken note down for mental health. So if you go into the LGBTQ Center and you ask about the program and, all the intersective clubs and groups and things, do you also go into the mental health center and ask about the opportunities there and how students access that? Is that part of the search as well?
When it comes to mental health, I'm usually thinking from the inside out. So I want students to be in a place where they are supported, happy, having everything that they need, so that any mental health challenge is like coming from the student, not coming from the college. So that's the first place I'm starting. After that, if the student needs mental health support, it's kind of how, we would always look into this for our students, right? We want to check in and see what the colleges offer, but ultimately, pretty much every single college out there is not really equipped to help students with a high level of mental health care. That if students are really in that place where they know that they're going to need mental health support, I want my families to take this from the college. There's no reason that they should put this thing in the college's hands when Zoom makes it so that we can establish continuity of care before a student even arrives at the school, and students can continue seeing the mental health professional that was supporting them before. Yes, it's a cost burden on families, but this is that thing that you don't play around with if it really matters. It would be the same thing with gender affirming care. If a student is able to find a healthcare specialist who can help them with that in person in the new place, I think that's great. But some places, you may not find the perfect person to help you with that in person, and you just, we have we have really good telehealth now, and it's only going to get better and better. And so that's another thing that students can maintain continuity of care without relying on the health center at the schools, which I think is just we just have the minimum expectations of these places, and they still let us down. So when students are checking out the health center, it's kind of like, do you know anything about challenges that LGBTQ students face when it comes to sexual health or gender or mental health, or do you know anything about it? Do you know where to start? Do you feel comfortable having a safe conversation with me? Or is this a place I'm totally going to avoid? Is kind of, I don't know if you feel the way Cindy, it's the same way Cindy is, where these places seem to be very poorly equipped for real needs, but they can do a good job when it comes to condoms and Band-Aids.
Right. Yeah, very true. Very true. Well, but that you point out a really good challenge. Since COVID, the telehealth has really expanded, and some of the rules and things on that have really relaxed, and hopefully we'll see those continue to be relaxed, but that too may change. I know one of my daughters is a professional therapist, and she is still restricted in terms of where she can offer care, even through a virtual setting. So even state by state, those laws change. So that does affect where you live and where you might be going to college, how you can build that continuity of care. So
I definitely agree. If you have, I think doctors may have a network of referrals that hopefully you could meet the person that was giving you care before you arrived at the college. That it's not something you want to figure out later. But I agree that there's going to be challenges in place that the student needs to think about and get ahead of if it's important.
So you mentioned about gender affirming care and some of the state politics. So let's talk a little bit more about that, because that is definitely a very rapidly changing landscape. And we know more and more states either have or are planning on passing laws. I know I heard this governor of a particular Western state that was they were the first ones to pass the law, and was citing some research that said, oh, students can't know what who they are or whether they need gender affirming care or not. We want to wait until they're older. So this is more and more states or other places are going to be adopting these. So what do we look for, and especially as a counselor, what kind of questions and things do I need to be asking colleges or these regents that serve my students?
It's a great question, and it's going to change all the time as the legislators are going to introduce the new bills. It's going to change every cycle, and then the bills will become laws that a judge is going to put an injunction against, and then it's a constantly evolving thing. And for the most part, it's like spreading feathers politically for politicians. Is that this is culture war stuff. Is that in reality, I don't believe that many of these politicians are really thinking about the children, because they've done the deep research into what goes into gender affirming care, and they see a real threat to specific students. But instead, this is something political. And when it comes to politics, we watch it, but it could change. If you asked me a year ago where the ball was going on the culture war topics that might affect LGBTQ students in college, it would be something about a transgender swimmer, although it was a little weird, right? Like one transgender swimmer was going to be important enough that we were all going to talk about it. I don't know if you remember that, the LGBT, but that seems to be something that we dropped, was the transgender students playing sports. That we got tired of that topic. It wasn't sticking enough as a narrative. I believe this narrative may stick well. Why? Because when it comes to gender affirming care for youth, it sounds like disfigurement of children. I mean, is somebody who wasn't educated about it is going to go to that scary place. In reality, the gender affirming care is a wide range of services across many disciplines. And it starts with therapeutic conversations. That's the first thing that we take away from children who are affected by these bans, is the opportunity to talk with a qualified professional about their gender dysphoria, the way that they're feeling, that is illegal. And could you imagine being a professional and not being allowed to have a conversation with a child who has feelings that they don't understand? You have an opportunity to help them, but the law says you can't. And then the stuff after that, if those conversations, and it doesn't, I mean, there's a bar for this, those conversations really have to go somewhere over a period of time for it to get to the place where it becomes hormone therapy. Right. Hormone therapy, people wonder about this. Hormone therapy is entirely reversible. So the things that are happening with hormone therapy are still not to the level that the bans make it sound like, because the bans really do take the power away from medical professionals to make medical decisions to help their patients. That's an enormous thing that the state has done. And then the part where you actually have a surgical element to gender affirming care is like the last step. And children don't really get there. I mean, usually they are in the adult place just by going through those other steps. And it doesn't really come up in reality. Just like the transgender swimmer didn't really take over swimming, like we were scared about. The reality is that doctors are watching out for their patients using their best medical judgment, and they're not doing surgery on children in the way that the bans make it sound like they are. Right. Anyways, I say all of this because I think that when it comes to helping our students with their college search and the politics, we really want to think about what's actually going to affect them. And some of this stuff is scary and is based in misinformation and is going to go back and forth as people learn new things or get tired of things and talk about new things. Some of this stuff could really affect our students. We want to identify it, say it out loud, and say, are we going to a school where this is a real possibility in the next 4 years? And when it's real, we want to talk about it and say it out loud. For example, students who can get pregnant going to a state where abortion might be might become illegal. Like that's a really, I mean, that could become a crisis for the student. So it's the same thing with the LGBTQ students. So when the Don't Say Gay bill became a big thing a couple of years ago, I was the one who kind of said, hey guys, yes, that's not good, but also there's no reason that this should affect our college students. Same thing with the gender affirming care for the children. That is telling us about state politics, but it shouldn't affect our college students. What could change is that the state could decide to push new bills where the age limit goes up. And they're trying to say, at what point will people push back on us where we're taking medical judgment away from medical professionals? For a 26-year-old to say that a doctor can't make a decision for a 26-year-old is, I mean, that's insanity. And so I think where the politicians are trying to get with it is like, they keep pushing it forward so that eventually it seems like a totally reasonable compromise that we, outlaw it for children, and then for 18 and up, they can do, they can seek care. As long as you have 18 and up so that they can seek care, the reality is that our students are going to be able to have their care in college. Now, they may have to go out of their way to get it. It may not, they should think about whether it be easy to get, as easy as it should be. But it can become a nuanced conversation. Of course, we want to see the ball coming. So in the next 4 years, would these bills become a thing? From the way it looks now, some of these conservative states do look like they are currently pushing bills that would outlaw gender affirming care up to the age of 21 or up to the age of 26. These states, I think we should say them, Oklahoma and South Carolina are the first ones to look at, but that's just right now, right? And so we should be ready for these bills to come out. And I would say that where I want my students to be open-minded about lots of colleges when it comes to gender affirming care, I would probably not want them to be in one of those states where that could be taken away from them, because that is so high stakes. So with a lot of students, I want them to be more open-minded. Go visit Oberlin, just give it a shot. Unless we can point to a danger or a real crisis that could happen. So that's the big one about gender affirming care. There's one more that I would say that we should be aware of. And that's that it used to be that I could send LGBTQ students to really open-minded colleges in conservative states. And then when I would talk to the, and I didn't do that all the time, but I could do it, and as part of a conversation. But if I talked to the rep at one of these schools, what they would say is that we're the meat of the sandwich. This was their analogy. There's a sandwich, and then you have the state politics on one side and the students on the other, and they are a barrier protecting students and communicating and protecting as they need to do. And I thought that was a confusing but also good response. Like, it made sense to me. But here's the thing, is that works if we make the assumption that the states would not come onto the campus and start interfering in the actual school's philosophy or their mission or their programming or their hiring practices. And this is what just got pushed within the last couple of weeks. So I don't know if you know that one of my favorite colleges, New College of Florida.
I just heard something about that today. So yeah, I don't know exactly what happened, but I heard it was pushed out.
Yeah, I think it's a game changer if the governor would interfere with a college's programming, specifically public colleges. Yeah, that's a big deal. So if I'm sending a student to New College, knowing that it's an amazing place and more than half the students are, identify as LGBTQ, but then to hear that the state is going to affect the programming so that it becomes a different school in the next 4 years, that's, one, it's awful, and it means I have to keep that school off the students' lists. But two, I'm worried about what it means for the future, because once you break the tape on that, are we going to do that in other states? Is that going to be a Texas thing? Is Texas going to tell UT Austin, the programs that they can or can't have? Are we going to affect the hiring practices so that we can't hire certain people, or that we must hire certain people? I get really worried about this thing. And so I know that there's a lot of really hot topics that people are watching. This is the one that I'm watching.
Yeah, in so many ways, it feels like we've been going backwards instead of forwards. That's like, how did we end up? It just feels like we're back in the 1960s or, early 70s. It's just crazy.
Yes, but at the same time, it's never been safer or a better opportunity for our LGBTQ students than it has been in history. It's such.
That's good to hear.
Yes, it's I think it's both things. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's why, mental health right now for all youth, is a huge issue. It's a topic we always talk about and we hear a lot, but mental health for LGBTQ plus students is even higher because you have a higher rate of suicide or suicide ideation or, just, depression, anxiety, all those things is at a much higher differential for LGBTQ students. And so we definitely want to be cognizant of that and make sure they do have that good support. So one more thing I wanted to ask you about, Robert, you mentioned something about being aware of schools that ask for Title IX exemption. Explain what that is and what that means and why that's important to be aware of.
Yes, that's such a wonderful question. So Title IX protects our students. They, by law, get equal treatment, period. And sometimes some bad actors will try to confuse the students to say that your gender protection is not a real gender protection. We're trying to protect the women. But of course, that's a lie. That's damaging. And so that's why there's a website, Know Your Nine. It's IX Know Your Nine. And it's a great resource to share, not only to use, but to share with students, because not everybody knows about the laws that protect them, even though they're at work every day to protect them. So we need to make sure our students are at schools where the law protects them. It doesn't matter what the school is. That's there for the students, and it's a bad thing if that's not there for the students. Similar to schools that get exemptions to giving the students ADA support, schools can get an exemption to Title IX so that they can discriminate as much as they want if they make a case for it and get approved for the Title IX exemption. And usually it's on a religious basis, that I'm a religious school, and so this does not fall within my values. Although if you ask the school, they might tell you, oh, but Jesus would love everybody. I don't care. This is the worst place to send a student, is a school that's either requested or been granted a Title IX exemption. There's no there's no excuse, or there's no way forward if a school is on this list of schools that have this exemption. It's often religious schools, but don't make assumptions. You can go to Campus Pride Index and find your worst of the worst list, and every school that gets a Title IX exemption or requests one goes on that list. The Campus Pride Index worst of the worst list. And of course, you can also Google it, just Pepperdine, Title IX exemption. I don't think they have one. Cal Baptist, Title IX exemption. Yes, they have one. I had a student in the past who was, Cal Baptist tried to recruit them. Cal Baptist offered this student, what they called a full ride scholarship. I don't know what they really meant, but they offered scholarship money, financial aid, something very compelling that made this student apply against my wishes to Cal Baptist to see what would happen with the money. And that student did not go to Cal Baptist, fortunately. But it's just to say that those schools are out there working their recruitment. They are, in my professional and strong opinion, bad actors trying to recruit LGBTQ students to their campuses when they have Title IX exemptions. Ultimately, we can't stop them from getting Title IX exemptions. We need to recognize those schools and just say that they are persona non gratis when it comes to our college lists.
Well, I'll definitely look that up and put links in that to those programs that you've mentioned in my course materials and things like that, so people can keep abreast of it. Is there a certain place where you can does the Campus Pride also keep abreast of the legislative issues, or is there a place to go to keep track of that?
It's in the same place, actually. Just when you go to the worst of the worst list, if they are engaged in legislation, either on the defensive end or as the plaintiff, they go on the worst of the worst list. And you can also search schools individually, so you don't have to just scroll the worst of the worst. You can also search the school on Campus Pride Index.
Okay. So in closing, Robert, what advice would you give to college advisors? Both, we have people who are in public schools, in private schools, community-based organizations. We have people in military programs too that are working with students, and they're all different. Our students are all in that transition. So what would your words of advice be for us as counselors and advisors?
It's the same lesson that I learned actually as a teacher in the classroom, which was that if I had an observation from the principal that they were walking in, the best observation would feel really awkward because I would just be standing there, and I wouldn't be doing anything. The students would be doing stuff, but I would just be standing there doing nothing, and that would be the best performance. Is sort of the same thing for this, is that our best work happens sometimes when we are not speaking when our mouths are closed and our ears are open and we're listening to students. Even if you have lots of students, or if it's hard to find the time or you're not sure where to start, just try sitting in the room, looking a student in the eye, give them a chance to speak. A lot of times the students are going to have something to share that would surprise you. Our students are full of surprises. And sometimes being experts like we are leads us to want to talk a lot. And that's our Achilles heels, is the instinct that says, I can help, let me talk, and you listen. And honestly, it's both really hard and really easy. So you just listen, stop talking, listen to the students, hear what they have to say, and it should guide the conversation on to the next step. I'll say one more thing, which is about pronouns. We didn't talk about pronouns. I think that there's, the rule is easy. When it comes to the students' pronouns, you ask their pronouns, share your pronouns, ask their pronouns, write them down, use them. There's not really a conversation to have about them, just know them. But if you're like me, you have a lot of college knowledge in your head that you're spinning around all the time, and you're thinking of students and all of their different preferences and the colleges and all of their different offerings, and you're trying to match make, and you're doing so much in your head that you can forget when you talk to a student to use the right pronoun, and it's totally innocent. And also, when we're talking to students, we mostly use a second person, so it can feel like a curveball, a surprise when we have a hypothetical where the student is on the campus and we say, all of your friends will meet you and say, where's she at, or where's he at, where's they, and if you may use the wrong one, and the students are all different about it. Some of them will just let it go. They don't, some of them may not even notice, but some of them will just let it go. And others will stop you immediately, and they'll go, they're, and it's like, whoa. And suddenly your entire college, you doing your job, you're doing it so well, and everything is just interrupted. It's stopped for this moment of they, them. And that's good. That's a good moment. It's a good, productive moment where you are reminded about something that also really matters. Everything, all of this stuff matters. But I think that the best thing to do is it's so good for us is just to say, yes, okay, thank you. I don't actually know how that happened, but I'm not going to let that happen again. And then you don't let it happen again. You write it down. What I do is that I care so much about the students and getting this right that I will beat myself up about it. Sometimes in front of the students, I'll go, how did I mess that up? I know who you are. I don't. And it's almost like that's the stressful response, is that we have an opportunity to say, oh, I get it. Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, let's do that. And if you have a stressful moment, I would just, take a moment to yourself and not share that with the student, because we don't want to stress students out. Like, we're not trying to stress them out. And also, our students are usually not angry at us for making one mistake. They do this their entire lives. They do this all the time. Correct people about their pronouns. And so when we just say, okay, yeah, all right, thank you, and you move forward, that's the way to handle that situation. That was one of the hardest things for me, especially when I was first starting working with a lot of LGBTQ students.
Well, and then you're building that rapport, and they know they can be honest with you and know that you care and you'll respond. Even if you are making mistakes, at least they feel like they can correct you without being judged or, having to be defensive or something like that. So I think that's really good advice.
Moment of trust. Exactly.
Yep. Well, Robert, thank you very much. This has just been so illuminating, and I really appreciate your time and especially sharing your own story and your journey and how that has connected you to students and other professionals. So thank you very much.
My pleasure.
We'll see you next time.
Okay. Bye, Cindy.
Hold on.